Okay, welcome everybody. Today we're talking about sleep. As you can imagine, it's a huge topic, and I'm going to try and give you an overview and give you some information that's sort of relevant to our age group and some of the things that are going on right now in the field. But feel free to stop me at any time, and ask questions or, make a comment because it's a small enough group that we can do that. And I think it's more interesting that way. So let's just launch right in. It's sort of amazing how little we know about sleep, as it's something that you spend a third of your life doing. We know it's necessary. We know a lot of people have trouble with it. We know that different cultures have different sleep patterns or habits, and we know that it was very different once before there was artificial light. So what we regard as a normal night's sleep, and what some people would define as a sleep disorder if you don't go to bed and sleep for 6 to 8 hours or something straight through, or without significant breaks in it. There was two groups that it's kind of interesting at the same time happened to be looking at. One was looking at literature about sleep and found all of this writing that spoke about a first sleep and a second sleep. And in pre-industrial times, where people would come in from the agriculture, they come in from the fields, they'd eat, they'd go to bed, they'd sleep for about 4 hours, they'd wake up, they'd have a meal, a small meal or pray, have sex. I mean, the French, of course, describe that bit, and then go back to sleep for about 4 hours, and get up around sunrise and do it all over again. So that really jarred things, and they, around the same time, had a research group that got volunteers to go into these rooms where there was no light from the outside, and they stayed in there for about a month. I don't know how they get people to do this, and what they found was the very same pattern, where people would sleep about 4 hours. They'd go onto a basically 24-hour clock. They'd wake after about 4 hours. I mean, you can imagine how, from an evolutionary standpoint, conking out for 6 to 8 hours probably was a pretty dangerous thing to do. So, people who complain about middle of the night awakening, I'm not sure that's a sleep disorder, but it's defined as a sleep disorder if it's difficult to go back to sleep in, more than a half hour or so. So, we spend an awful lot of time sleeping. We know it's incredibly important. You can go much longer without food than you can without sleep. We know a lot about sleep from the point of view of what happens when people are sleep deprived, but that doesn't really tell you really what the natural process is about. It's universal in the animal kingdom. You see insects sleep, right up to the largest animals around. Giraffes sleep 1.9 hours a night, and
sleep standing up.
Yeah, and koalas sleep 22. I thought the sloth would be the biggest sleeper, but no. And then I was curious how, if everyone sleeps, how do dolphins or whales, breathing, animals in the ocean? And apparently, what they do is half the brain they take turns. It's a hemisphere sleeps, one hemisphere sleeps, then the other hemisphere sleeps, and that's how they're able to, stay breathing, going to the surface. We also know that it's, something that's used for, torture and coercion most effectively. It's an incredibly expensive thing when people don't sleep well enough. $56 billion or so goes into the accidents and errors that occur because of sleep, 25,000 deaths and millions of injuries. Over 70 million people in this country have a sleep disorder diagnosed. We know that less than 6 hours of sleep creates a lot of systemic inflammation, which is the first chapter in almost everything that can go wrong with you. It's not complicated, though, if you want to know if you are getting enough sleep, because the best way to tell is if you're tired. It's that simple. It's similar to people wondering if they're hydrated. Just look at your urine, and it's fairly clear you're hydrated. If you're not drowsy, you're getting enough sleep, right? There's some people who brag about, there are two sides of the brag, right? Some people brag that they don't need sleep. They're very macho about, I get 4 hours of sleep and I'm fine. And there are some people, but they're tiny percent of the population. And the other interesting thing is when they do studies that look at how you're performing, and they serially sleep deprive them, right? So they sleep deprive them for an hour, let them recover the next week, 2 hours, and they test them after they've been sleep deprived with motor tests and cognitive tests. And one of the questions is, do you think the sleep deprivation has begun to affect you? And the cognitive and motor test results decreased by 50% before people will say, I think it's beginning to. So we're very bad judges of whether, sleep deprivation is affecting you. So we spoke about this. The other interesting thing is they found that in these subjects, there was a huge surge of the hormone oxytocin in that short waking period in the middle of the night. And oxytocin, as you may know, is this social hormone, and it's all about connection. It's like, breastfeeding mothers have the surge of oxytocin. And it's just interesting that for the most part, we're not getting that, and you have to wonder whether that's affecting the culture or not. So we also know that screens and blue light are activating, and it's not something that you want to do before you're going to bed. And a huge majority of people in this country do watch TV before they go to bed. So if you look historically in this country, in 1910, the average number of hours slept is 9 hours. 2013, which is the last time the National Sleep Foundation did a study, that's why you have that date, it was 7 hours, which is a 22% reduction, which is pretty big. And you have to wonder how that's affecting us. So I'm going to start with just a few examples of what we've seen. The immune system is dramatically affected by sleep deprivation. This was a study where they had student volunteers who were only allowed to sleep 4 hours a night for 6 days. And their blood pressure went up significantly, their cortisol, the stress hormone went up. There was a 50% reduction of antibody production after a flu vaccine. That's pretty dramatic, right? And they also had an increased insulin resistance, which is, sort of the precursor to diabetes. We've seen that, with sleep deprivation, you're at an increased risk for all of these things. And these are some of the most common ailments in our culture. So, one of the most powerful tools for health is a good night's rest. It's just not very sophisticated, and people, I think, really underestimate the power of sleep. But it is a phenomenal regenerative and renewing system. Another immune study, they took 153 subjects and exposed them to a cold virus. And those who slept less than 7 hours were 3 times as likely to get sick as those who averaged 8 hours a night. It's important in these times, right? Weight gain also is dramatically increased when there's a problem with sleep, especially seen in children. But what happens is it disrupts all of the hormones that are involved in metabolism. What we've found is that you basically have a very different physiology when you're sleeping to when you're awake. And it's necessary to have that different physiology in order to reap the benefits of sleep in terms of regeneration and renewal. So let's talk about what we know in terms of how sleep is categorized and thought about, because it's important when we're going to start talking about different parts of sleep. So there's 2 basic types, right? There's non-REM and REM, REM being rapid eye movement sleep or dream sleep. And the 2 of them, non-REM and REM sleep, are as different from each other as they are waking is to sleep. And you have a full cycle. So you go, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and REM every 90 minutes throughout the night. So let's first talk about non-REM sleep. It's called quiet sleep. it's really when things shut down, movement can still occur, and there are 4 stages. Just to make it complicated, they have N1, N2, and N3, and then N1 is stage 1, N2 is stage 2, and N3 is stage 3 and 4. I don't know why they have to do that, but that's the way it's. So N1 is going from, that's very full weight. If you have very wakefulness, you're 2 hours, but that's a mistake. So you go from waking to light sleep during N1. It's short-lived, about 5 minutes. Body temperature starts to decrease, which is one of the reasons why if you have a room that's not cool, it's much harder to fall asleep. The body needs to cool down in order to fall asleep. Muscles relax, and you're very easily awoken from N1. N2 is the first stage of true sleep. It lasts about 15, 25 minutes. There's a big decrease in heart rate and respiratory rate. And the EEG starts showing these spindle bursts. These are all distinguished by EEG, electroencephalogram, right? So when they put all of those leads on your scalp in a sleep lab, it's sort of amazing. You see what they do when you go into a sleep lab and you go, could anyone sleep under those circumstances? But they just need to catch, 90 minutes of sleep to see where you're at. So apparently you can. N3, which is stages 3 and 4, is deep sleep. And it's also called slow wave sleep. And this is the most important sleep in terms of health. If you're sleep deprived, you go into N3 much more rapidly than if you're, not sleep deprived. Heart rate and blood pressure decrease about 20 to 30%. It's very difficult to wake people up. There's a surge of growth hormone. The immune system is activated. And this is what they think is the most important stage in terms of renewal repair. It's very involved in memory also, and we'll talk about that. So is REM sleep. One of the things it tells you is, students, who do these all-nighters, it's just all wrong because your capacity to remember and learn things is really impaired. And they've done these experiments where they deprive people of N3 sleep or REM sleep only and test. And then you do the same, each individual serves as their own control, and they let them sleep through the night and have them learn a thing. And you really are compromised when you're losing that, N3 sleep and REM. You don't get refreshed if you don't feel refreshed, if you don't get the N3 sleep. I mentioned that you go to N3 faster if you've been sleep deprived. And most of the N3 sleep is pushed toward the beginning of the night, which also suggests that it's a priority, as opposed to REM, which is more toward the latter part of the night, the early morning hours, which is one reason why, you remember your dreams, because it's closer to a waking hour. So REM, as opposed to non-REM sleep, there's an active brain and a paralyzed body. You can't move voluntarily when you're dreaming. Body temperature, respiratory rate, heart rate are all over the place. They believe that a lot of irrelevant data is purged during REM sleep. It's essential for optimal learning. And as I said, it occurs mostly in the early morning. I'm going to talk about this glymphatic system. This was just discovered in 2013 by a Danish scientist, and it is probably the biggest and most important finding about sleep ever. The lymph system is a system that parallels the vasculature, that parallels the blood circulation, right? And where you have a metabolically active area of the body, you have a lot of lymph. And the reason is because lymph basically is a waste removal system. So if you have a metabolically active part of the body, you have a lot of metabolic byproducts being created that have to be taken away, yeah? it was confusing because we know that the brain is the most metabolically active part of the body. I mean, and it's so disproportionate. I mean, I don't know what percent, 2% or something of our weight, but 70% or something of our metabolic activity when we're sitting. And what they found was that in N3 sleep, the cells in the brain create a space between themselves, and cerebrospinal fluid sweeps through and basically cleans out all of this metabolic waste. And it only happens during N3 sleep. One of the biggest waste products that's created by this metabolic activity in the brain is amyloid, which you've probably heard of, because amyloid plaques are what you find in Alzheimer's disease and many dementias. So this is where we first realized that there is a connection between sleep and dementia. We'll come back to some things about the lymphatic system when we talk about N3 again, but just talking about how we are driven towards sleep. There are two main drivers. One is this homeostatic mechanism where it's the amount of sleep, the less you are getting, the more pressure builds up to go to sleep. And the other is just a circadian rhythm, a 24-hour rhythm. And it's remarkable. There are clocks basically in every cell in the body. And that clock changes the way the cell functions within that 24 hours. And you can take a crab from the West Coast and say the crab scurries down to the water every day at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you take it to the East Coast and it will be 3 hours off for a while, and then it acclimates. So it's every animal and every cell. So we spoke about this, this sleep pressure, they call it, builds throughout the day and decreases with sleep. And this circadian clock synchronizes everything that's going on in the body. There are two peak sleep pressure times in the middle of the night and 2 to 3 p.m. This is the worst time to give a talk, probably, because people are most tired. If you have an important meeting, or if you don't want people to listen, this would be a good time. So let me talk a little bit about sleep over the life cycle, because it changes, as you can imagine, dramatically. At 6 months, you start sleeping through the night. 6 years, you're awake all day. Melatonin levels seem to peak between 7 and puberty, and you start having a lot of that deep sleep, restorative sleep. There shouldn't be a need to sleep much during the day. The newborn sleeps about 8 times a day for 18 hours and spends half that time in labor. We don't know why. At least I couldn't find any explanation. During adolescence, this is the most rapid period of growth development after infancy. So there's a huge amount of work going on in the body. And that probably dictates why it seems as if teens need an hour more sleep than they did as young children. And they probably get at least an hour less just because of their lifestyle. And that's called delayed sleep, phase, when, they sort of their whole clock moves up and they're not sleepy until late and they have great difficulty getting up in the morning. And, where we have the school systems, usually they have to be up pretty early to get to school on time. And one school district did this experiment where they changed nothing except the start time. They didn't change teacher-student ratio, curriculum, textbooks, just started later, and test scores went up something like 20 to 30%. So we know that memory and learning are dramatically affected by sleep. And we know these results now from that study. This was some years ago, and yet I guess it's just a difficult. It's like a hospital. It's not for the patients, for the doctor's convenience to be able to find. You get put to bed as soon as you go into the hospital, but we know going to bed is one of the worst things for you. You don't have to go to bed, but to find the patient when the doctor is making rounds, they'll keep you in bed all day. It's sort of similar in the school system, where they continue to just start the kids early. As you move into middle age, it seems as if sleep time decreases about 10 minutes a decade. I say nocturnal sleep time because they thought for a while that older people don't need as much sleep and that they sleep less. And it seems as if that's not true, because if you take into account daytime naps, you continue to sleep about the same amount. From adulthood to age 60, there's a 2% decrease in N3 per decade. REM also decreases, but not as dramatically, but also plateaus around 60. That's good news, because you don't want to lose N3 sleep at all. And there's a lot of things that are going on that are really exciting, that are in their infancy, that are to increase or promote slow wave sleep, because as you can imagine, that can be very powerful. And they've shown that even with people who have already demonstrated a cognitive deficit, like a minimal cognitive impairment, or frank dementia, if you increase N3 sleep, you increase their cognitive performance and improve their memory. And it would be, compared to a medication, we've had terrible luck with all of the agents that we've tried. But one of the things that you're doing when you increase N3 sleep is you're increasing the removal of amyloid. And so it would make sense that you would see less pathology. There seems to be a gender disparity here in terms of the effect of aging on sleep. Men suffer more with age of decreased sleep, increased awakenings, greater decrease in N3 and REM sleep. Whereas women don't seem to experience that, but have a greater increase in sleep latency, which is the time it takes you to fall asleep. This is another good news slide. There does not seem to be any relationship between aging and sleep problems. Even though you see sleep problems increasing if you take big surveys with age, but what they found was it's disease entities that are causing sleep problems. So it would be called a secondary insomnia or something, but it's not a primary problem. And that's a good thing, because if you have some luck and take good care of yourself, there's no reason to assume that, this is happening across the board. We used to think that all sorts of things went wrong and it was aging and it was normal. And now we're really appreciating more and more that that's not normal aging, that's disease, So there was a study they did. They took people who were from 55 to 84, and those who were diagnosed with one medical condition on the sleep survey reported 40% of them reported, sleep was fair to poor. And in the healthy population, 10% only rated sleep fair to poor. We spoke about this a little bit. This is also interesting. There was a study where they looked at healthy elderly, and they found that they were less sleepy and performed better on alertness and attention tests than young people after the same amount of sleep deprivation. So there. Health-related quality of life. One big study, it seems as if it begins to increase, or decrease, I should say, when you go above or below about 7 hours. That seems to be the sweet spot, right around there. And everybody's different, so there's some wiggle room. But it seems as if that's around the what you want to aim for, at least if it feels right to you.
One question.
Yeah.
When you say 7 hours of sleep, that's not 7 hours in bed, that's 7 hours of actually sleeping.
That's a great point. Yeah. And, you know, most people, if you're going to meet the criteria for a diagnosis of insomnia, one of the criteria is it takes more than a half hour to fall asleep. And we know that if you fall asleep in 5 minutes or less, you're really sleep deprived. But we're talking about sleep time. And now there's devices, you know, like Aura rings and all sorts of things. I mean, some of them, I think the claims are a little inflated. There's no way they can tell what sleep phase you're in. They may claim to, but without electrodes on your scalp, it's impossible to have any sense of what the electroencephalogram, you know, what the electrical activity would be. But we are talking about time asleep, not time in bed. Yeah. So naps, you know, a lot of people ask about naps, you know, and they're very different depending on how long you sleep, because you're going to get a certain piece of that 90-minute cycle, right? So a 20 to 30-minute nap, you're mainly in stage 2. So you're not in deep sleep. You're easily, you know, awoken. But it allows for an improvement in memory. If you go for a longer nap, 30 to 60 minutes, you get N2 and N3. So the memory is really boosted and learning is much better, but you're groggy when you wake up, and you're probably going to have to set an alarm. You know, it's not going to be a natural waking. And then if you do 60 to 90, if you can get in that full cycle, you get the REM in, it's easier to wake up after REM sleep. If you do it in the middle of the day, you have about equal amount of REM and N3. If you do it in the evening, you have more deep sleep. And the only problem with that is that a lot of people find it difficult to fall asleep after having a late day nap. This is an interesting thing. We just went through this. It's sort of amazing that we still do it, given the statistics, right? 1 hour in the week of daylight saving, 20%. That's amazing, I thought. Crazy. And almost equally, you know, you gain an hour. So I think it speaks to the power of sleep, the power of the rhythm, you know, that, you know, for instance, when we travel, people who travel all the time, you know, changing time zones, are at much greater risk for everything, it seems. Night shift workers, much more vulnerable. Everything, you know, infectious diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancers. Someone did a big study where they were looking at how sleep was affected during COVID. And they found that people were sleeping about 25 more minutes a night, but reported 60% said they slept worse, which isn't surprising, I guess, because of the anxiety of the situation. They had a phase advance. They seemed to, you know, go to bed later and wake up later. And they self-reported that there was increased dreaming, but it's probably because they were waking up later. And so they were catching that REM. So this gives you an idea about, if you're going to diagnose someone with insomnia, you have to have at least one of these top 3. So at least 3 times a week, 3 times per week for at least 3 months, you have difficulties going to sleep, which to a sleep doctor means it takes you more than 30 minutes. I think a lot of people, you know, and a lot of the ads make it seem as if, you know, if it takes a half hour to go to bed, you think you have a problem, but you don't. I mean, that's pretty normal. The trouble is we always feel that we don't have enough time in this culture. Difficulty staying asleep, if you're getting, you know, less than 5.5 to 6 hours because of difficulty maintaining sleep, or if you're waking earlier than you want to. And the kinds of symptoms that this produces, you know, are sort of obvious in terms of, you know, impaired attention, memory, fatigue, irritability, and performance. These are things that are associated with trouble sleeping. So if you had one of these diagnoses, and your sleep was impaired, you wouldn't have a primary insomnia. You'd have a secondary because it's being caused by this, and it should go away if you successfully treat the underlying condition. Another common thing are breathing disorders that can lead to sleep troubles. Snoring is common, but usually not a problem, at least for the person snoring. There's nothing worse than being kept awake by someone who's sleeping, I think. But this, obstructive sleep apnea is not uncommon, and it's a serious condition. And what happens is the breathing stops hundreds of times a night because the airway closes down. And it's seen a lot in obese people, but you don't have to be obese. Alcohol can contribute to it. It causes enormous daytime fatigue, a lot of traffic accidents, people falling asleep at the wheel, doubles the risk of stroke, blood pressure goes way up, and CPAP is the most successful treatment for it. And that is, this machine where you wear a mask and it pumps air into your lungs so it doesn't let the airway collapse and you don't wake up because, you think you're... I had a patient who was reporting these dreams of asphyxiation, and she wasn't overweight at all, but she had sleep apnea, she had obstructive sleep apnea.
I have a CPAP, and if I don't have it on and I doze off for a nap, that happens to me, and I feel like somebody's choking me.
Yeah.
I wake up and I can't breathe.
Yeah, no, it's supposed to be a horrible sensation.
I
Yeah,
have to have it on.
yeah. But people, do you swear by the machine? Yeah,
I couldn't be without it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing
It
how
takes
it.
a little while
gives
to
you-
get used to, but I have to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
I second that.
yeah, yeah. The thing is, there's no consciousness of these awakenings usually during the night. So
Right.
people are,
You don't know.
they're tired. They know they're tired. They're trying to sleep more, but that's not the problem. The problem is that their airway stops. They gasp when they wake up. But it's a micro. They're not fully awake, but they go to say N1, which you won't have a conscious record of. Yeah.
You talk about not being able to sleep. What happens if you want to sleep all the time? It seems like that's what I want to do. Get up in the morning, I almost fall asleep at the breakfast table. I have a CPAP machine. I
Okay.
sleep all night, but I probably sleep 2 hours in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon. I never get anything done.
Yeah. I hear you.
It's, what can I do about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that I would like to do a sleep study with you on
I've
the
done
CPAP.
sleep studies.
Huh?
I have done sleep studies,
With the CPAP?
yes.
And what did they find?
They found out that I had a very serious condition of sleep apnea.
But was your,
Nobody can tell me why I sleep during the day all the time.
well, it would, I presume that you're not getting the restorative effect of,
Yeah, but
Getting
I
through the
all
sleep-
night.
well, you're asleep, but that doesn't mean, I'll give you an example. My wife said that I was kicking her at night. Now during the day, no, I was, and I said, no, I don't think that's possible. I think that's ridiculous. And finally she said, you have to go and get a sleep study. So I did, and I told the doctor why I was there and everything. And I never slept particularly well, but it wasn't. And he said, "Man, you owe your wife an apology." And he showed me a tape, and I was kicking like from the hip and I woke up, I didn't wake, but you have these kicks and you're going into N2, maybe 500, 1,000 times in a night. And I was treated for it. It was a periodic limb movement disorder. I'll mention later, but it's incredibly common. It's like restless leg syndrome. It's treated with Parkinsonian drugs, dopamine drugs.
What are those drugs?
Drugs that are used for Parkinson's also,
Okay,
because it's a movement disorder.
yeah, because I also have restless leg.
Okay, are you on any of those agents are you taking something for it?
No,
Like pramipexole? That may be the problem.
but
mean-
also on narcotics for a bad back.
Oh, well, that'll sedate you. You didn't tell me that. The narcotics are very sedating. It's hard to be alert and not tired when you're taking narcotics, especially if you have a lot of pain, you need to have a significant amount in your system. So that's
So
probably,
the narcotics that are keep me awake.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be sweet.
Yeah.
But can't get up.
sorry?
How do I get off them? My back hurts all the
No,
time.
yeah, that's, what might be helpful is there's certain safe, you could do low dose stimulant in the morning that might take you through.
What's a stimulant?
It's something that is
I mean,
the opposite of sedating.
right, I know that.
Yeah.
But what is the name of the stimulant?
Oh, there's a whole class of them.
Okay.
Maybe you could speak to your sleep doctor about that.
Espresso.
It's called espresso.
I don't like coffee.
Here we go. So, restless leg syndrome. 10% of the population between 30 and 70 have this. 2 out of 3 are female. And it's just as it sounds, it's a restless feeling in the lower body where you can't sit still, you have to move. Usually later in the day, it mounts up, but it continues to affect people when they go to bed. And they're not even necessarily aware of it. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they feel that they can't stop moving. These people can't use a top sheet. They're just really active during the night, and it can be treated. And you see more of it as we get older. The periodic limb movement disorder is related, but there's more of a violent sort of a kick or jerk of the arms or legs. It's not just the lower body, but every 20 to 40 seconds. So that's a lot of movement over the course of the night. And it turns out that most people who have restless leg have some degree of periodic limb movement disorder. And this is even more common. It's seen mostly in the first half of the night. And, as I said, the person has no idea that it's going on. One of the best treatments for any sleep disorder is exercise. It's funny how often that comes up. And it speaks to really the way we live, and that, this inactivity that is sort of enforced almost by our work and, the way things operate creates all sorts of problems. It's not just weight and metabolism and, diabetes and cardiovascular, but it's also impairing sleep, which creates this vicious cycle, obviously, where, you're at just greater risk all wrong. These are some of the Parkinson's drugs that are used, and they're pretty effective. I'm not going to get into, there's so many sleep medications. There are different classes of sleep medications. The most important thing is that you do it with somebody who's experienced with sleep. A lot of times internists will just give you something that's sedating. Most of the over-the-counter stuff is not very good for you. It's usually Benadryl, or it has some sedating antihistamine in it, and people are very often groggy the next day and dry. They're dried out by it. One of the most dangerous things about sleep medications is they change sleep architecture. So like benzodiazepines like Valium, Librium, temazepam, any of them that end in AM, change sleep architecture in a way such that they decrease N3 sleep. So you may have this subjective sense of, you were asleep longer, and easier to fall asleep, but you're not getting the kind of restorative sleep that you should. And that's decreasing N3 sleep is obviously, now we know, something we don't want to do. They also can increase fall risk you get up to go to the bathroom or something and you've taken a sleep medication and your balance is affected, your vision can be affected. It can produce next day sedation. And it should be tailored to the specific sleep problem, right? So people, they divide it into, do you have difficulty falling asleep? Do you have middle of the night awakenings? Do you have early morning awakening, way before you need to be up, right? That sort of thing, you want to categorize it. And then there are a lot of people, it turns out, who just have difficulty getting to bed, putting themselves to bed, sort of, and it's not a sleep problem, it's an organizational problem. And that's more common than you might imagine. We don't need to spend much time on this, but just to give you an idea, so here are the benzodiazepines. It decreases, the amount of time it takes to get to sleep, number of awakenings, wake time after sleep onset, total sleep time increased, good, right? But N3 sleep was decreased. There are a lot of them that have variable effects. Some don't seem to change at all, like Zolpidem. So one of the hottest areas now in the sleep world is how we can increase N3 sleep. And there's some amazing experiments that are going on using auditory stimulation. And what they're finding is if you have a certain frequency stimulus, you can increase the length and intensity of N3 spindles in a very, very productive way. And there's no sedation, there's no downside to it. One example of that is pink noise. I never heard of pink noise until recently, but it's the color spectrum, just like light. White noise is all the frequencies in equal parts, right? Pink noise is a much greater low frequency to high frequency proportion. And there are a lot of natural sounds that you won't be surprised when you hear mimic pink noise, like water, a current, rain, rustling leaves, those sorts of background noises. So these, I don't want to badmouth anybody who's selling crystals or something, but they were way ahead of the game. They were selling tapes of waterfalls before anybody knew about pink noise, but they were right. Vagus nerve stimulation. So, you have the autonomic nervous system, right? And you have a sympathetic branch and a parasympathetic branch. And the sympathetic branch is the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic branch is the rest, regen, calm down. And as you can imagine, in N3 sleep, you have really high parasympathetic tone, right? But in our society, we're all sort of revved up a bit too much, and we have more sympathetic than parasympathetic tone. And one of the things they found recently was there's a branch of the vagus nerve that comes very close to the surface, to the skin, in the ear. And you can stimulate that branch of the vagus and increase parasympathetic tone, because the main conduit for sending the parasympathetic message is the vagus nerve, and it runs throughout the whole body. And there's a company called Nirvana, N-E-R-V Vana, and they have earbuds that will stimulate the vagus, and it's got pretty good data behind it, and they also play music. So you could stimulate the vagus and have a waterfall sound going, and we're just beginning to have real data on this, but it's pretty exciting stuff because it's so benign. The side effects are pretty much non-existent. There are a few things that would suggest that there are things you can swallow. L-theanine is something that is in green tea, in the teas, a lot in green tea, and it's a very calming compound. It's clean. It doesn't seem to create any problems, and it can help increase N3 sleep, especially combined with GABA, which is one of the biggest inhibitory neurotransmitters in the body, is gamma aminobutyric acid. And those are over-the-counter, supplements, as is magnesium. Magnesium seems to also help increase N3 sleep. And I predict that over the next 5 years, there'll be really good, big, well-conducted studies that will let us know how to do this. Because now, there's a million questions in terms of, should you have it on all night, just in the first half of the night? Do you have to have some sense of what the electrical activity of the brain is when you use it? Probably not, but we're still figuring it out. So I don't know if any, I want to just mention melatonin because there's so many people who use it, and I think most people are not using it the way it should be used. And melatonin can affect N3 sleep. The thing about melatonin is the body's signal of night, right? And it's made by the pineal gland, this little gland that sits in the head. And as it gets darker, you secrete melatonin, and that creates this cascade of, going down, the body slowing down. Because we don't have that natural decrease in light until we get into bed usually, we're all probably low on how much melatonin we would be seeing if we were in a natural environment. What melatonin's good for is initiating sleep. It's not good if you have trouble waking up in the middle of the night or early morning awakening. Melatonin's not going to help you at all. Melatonin is helpful sometimes when you're traveling and you go to another time zone and you want to reset your clock. It can be helpful that way. You want to take it 1 to 2 hours before you go to bed. And you also want to take maybe 1 to 2 milligrams. I mean, they sell 10 milligram, tablets over the counter, and and that's way too much. So that's I don't know if anybody's experimented with melatonin, but
I have tried it. My husband uses it, but it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So I stopped.
yeah. So our physiology is built around having basically, about 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. I mean, it changes over the course of the year, but and we have gone to a way of living where until you get into bed, you're exposed to light, and often a lot of light that has a lot of blue frequency, which is the most activating. And one of the things that people have shown to be helpful is these glasses that filter blue light that you can put on, in the early evening, so that you have a more natural, shift into, darkness. And that seems to help with melatonin secretion.
Question, Paul?
Yeah.
For the second time, I've seen sleep on the left side to prevent heart failure.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I'm not, I mean, the stomach is on the left more. And maybe it's allows a greater propensity for the, what is heartburn? Heartburn is when you have, reflux, basically, right? So there's a sphincter at the end of the, at the top of the stomach, and you have some regurgitation, and it's uncomfortable because it's very acidic, and it creates that sense of burning. And it seems as if when you're on the left side, there's a greater propensity for there to be just for less backflow. Thank you. Yeah. So the body really likes to have regularity, and it responds well to regularity. The body doesn't know from weekends, holidays, It really wants to wake up at the same time and go to bed at the same time. No matter what's happened, I mean, you might feel more sleep pressure if you've been up quite late, but then, people talk about a catch up, on the weekend, and there's no good studies that suggest, I mean, you will go into N3 sleep faster, but it's not a way of living and expecting healthy results. If you're being sleep deprived, you're paying for it. It's not as if you clear all that amyloid on the weekend and then you go back to your, routine during the week. So you want to have that kind of regularity. You want to be conditioned for the bed to be just sleep or sex. A lot of people get into bed and they read and if you have a sleep problem, they recommend you don't do that. And if you're not sleeping, they recommend you get out of bed and stay up for a while doing something in another room, with dim light, and then try to go back to bed. The cool, dark, quiet is big. I would say cool and dark are the most important. Anyone who's gone camping knows that it's not quiet in nature, but it's pretty dark and it gets cold. And if you think about where we evolved, I mean, around the equator, in Africa, the difference between daytime temperature and nighttime temperature is pretty dramatic. And so the body likes that. You want to avoid, caffeine after 2 is the recommendation, alcohol, tobacco in 2 hours before. There's some people who say even earlier. Part of the problem is that everyone's different in terms of their sensitivity to those agents. So you have to know yourself. Again, exercise is important. And then there's all sorts of relaxation techniques and, tapes and things like that. One of the popular ones for a long time was where you do sort of a body scan and you start with, one part of your body and you clench the muscles tight and release. You do that a few times, and then you move on to the next body part. And it seems to help let people relax and fall off to sleep. That's it. So any questions or comments?
If I was to go to a sleep doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, what are 2 or 3 questions I might ask to determine if he or she were an expert?
Well, for one thing, there are people who have a subspecialty in it. There's a board, and and that's what they do. So there are people who that's all they do. They see people who have sleep problems, and I think that's who you should see.
Doctors should recommend.
Yeah, I mean, but it should be, nowadays you can go online and you can see what their specialty is, and also, the populations that they treat, and it should be, some people say they treat everything, but if it's not up on the top of the list, it's probably not a real sleep doctor. Yeah.
I went to a neurologist. I highly recommend that. The
Yeah.
doctor said, I am loved, but I have to specialize, specialize.
Yeah.
in not many patients sleep study.
A lot of the sleep specialists are neurologists or psychiatrists. Yeah. Yeah. You had a question, sir.
Yes, I have a terrible time going to sleep. But I've been, the last year, I've been taking some THC edibles. It's called bedtime betties. It's like candy. And it knocks me out. And then I'll get up about 4 o'clock and wander around. And then I'll take another half of bedtime betty. Now,
Okay. Do you feel rested the next day?
yeah, I do feel rested, but I don't like being dependent on it. And it seems to be the best thing to put me to sleep. I have an injured shoulder, and I have to. That also bothers me.
Yeah. Musculoskeletal problems are very common causes of insomnia. Pain, usually pain related. I would say that the downside of taking something like that compared to the downside of not sleeping is not even comparable, you know.
I mean, I should
You
do
should-
what I can to get to sleep.
Yeah, yeah. There's sometimes it's interesting. You might want to experiment because the CBD is often more helpful than THC. I mean, THC can help with the pain.
Yeah.
In terms of just the sleep, CBD seems to be more involved in sleep initiation and maintenance. So, you know, they have amazing menus of, right, you know, different proportions.
I've also experimented with melatonin edibles.
Melatonin,
Yeah,
how was that?
it's not as effective as the bedtime bennies, but it's helpful. I just can't go to sleep on my own these days.
Yeah. I wouldn't feel bad about taking something. I mean, there may be a psychological addiction to taking something that works, but there's not a physiological. You're never going to go through withdrawal from your bedtime Betties or whatever they're called. Yeah.
The blue light glasses, are they for television or just your monitor? Let's say I play chess 10 hours a day, I love chess. Then should I be wearing glasses for that?
You play on screen?
Yes,
Yeah.
all day long.
It's for anything.
But is it for television? My TV's
Yeah.
about 15 feet in front of me, or not?
Doesn't
quite.
matter. Yeah.
The blue light.
Yeah. I mean, light bulbs, everything.
Do they
I mean,
put them in your prescription glasses? I can look it up.
no,
Okay.
not yet, at least.
Oh, so you have to wear them over your prescription?
Yeah, they've
glasses?
got clips and it may be possible to order them. You know, I don't know.
Amazon. To your prescription. Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
You can also, a lot of devices now have settings for the illumination of the screen that can eliminate the blue light.
There's a couple of questions online
Okay.
too. Martin asked about, he says he wears his Fitbit. Yeah, I do too, and it says it measures your sleep, but based on your earlier comments, is that really useless?
It can tell you how many hours you're sleeping, unless you're really good at staying still. But it can't give you real data about sleep architecture, about sleep stages.
I mean, it does give you data.
It does, yeah.
It claims to,
It
yeah.
claims
Yeah,
to.
it is. And that's my question is, I mean, it says I'm getting 7% REM and
Yeah,
it says I'm not sleeping, you know, I'm sleeping 6.5 hours, but I'm in bed for 8.5. But and also there's a function in it that you can tell it that you're starting to sleep. But I never use that function.
How would you?
how can you do that when you're starting to sleep?
When you go to bed, you say, okay.
Oh, when you go to bed.
But I don't use it.
I've had it tell me I'm sleeping when I'm watching a movie. That's it, so.
You may be.
I don't think I am.
So I was concerned because of the low rent.
I wouldn't be concerned because
Based on that.
it's not able to. What it can tell is if you're moving or not. And, you know, in REM sleep, you don't move at all. And so it might be comparing, but it's a really rough estimate. I wouldn't put too much faith in it. I mean, similarly, Apple Watches say that they can do an EKG. Soon you could have surgery. I mean, I don't believe in it. Yeah.
And then there's another question about what can my son do with his two boys who never sleep a full night? The 2-year-old wakes every few hours and never slept through the night. The 6-year-old wakes every night with a nightmare.
Wow. Well, those are tough situations, and there's a lot of different schools of thought on it. You know, there used to be, what did you Ferberize the baby? Remember that, Dr. Ferber?
Yeah.
You know, some people say let them scream.
Yeah.
You know, they'll quiet down tomorrow. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch that one, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you have to let them outgrow it, it's all.
But, you know, are they active? I mean, I would say, you know, are the kids getting enough physical activity would be my first. There's a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Get them to the gym.
Parents would probably say,
Yeah. Someone else had a.
You had listed magnesium as one of the, a supplement that could be beneficial for sleep. And I sometimes have trouble with leg and foot cramps. And I think, is that something also, and I'm wondering if there ends up being a relationship between.
Well,
the two.
Yeah, cramps can definitely wake you.
Yes. so
And,
that's
and
good.
magnesium can help with cramps, not everybody. Magnesium is a funny thing because it's very difficult to get a good sense of what your magnesium status is,
Mhm.
because it's mostly in tissue. And so if you take a blood test, it doesn't really tell you what the tissue levels are. And that's, important. And there's the gold standard now, I believe, is you're given a bolus, and you drink something that's got a certain amount of magnesium in it, and then they measure how much comes out in the urine, and it is indicative of whether you have a deficit or not. I think it's a lot to go through, but you could just try. It's a pretty benign, take.
And is there, like you say, for some people, it's a problem falling asleep or staying asleep. Is magnesium particularly for one part of that and just overall?
No, because it can help in every cycle.
Okay.
So you take it, shortly before you go to bed, 100, 200 milligrams.
Are doctors giving this magnesium test that you're talking about, or is this something I go and do it myself over the counter?
No, it would be through a doctor.
Yeah, doctor. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, most doctors probably have it. It's not typically.
Dr. Spector?
What they do is they give you a drink that has a certain amount of magnesium in it, and then they
Take a urine sample.
measure the amount of magnesium in the urine and see how much you're trying to hold on to.
So that's all you follow, just drink magnesium and have a urine sample.
Yeah,
There's no special name for
magnesium test.
it. Not the blood.
Not the blood test.
Okay.
Yeah,
The other
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Got it. Thanks.
yeah. All right, thank you.